So this was the story that broke. Alberta protesters get 6.5 year sentence for their roles in the COUTTS border blockade. Now, this is a story that Alex has been following very closely, and just wanted to bring this up and talk about this, maybe in a more casual setting. This isn't much of a report; it's more of a debrief on the story of the COUTTS 4 and what happened. Alex, yeah, lay it down. What was the verdict there?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Clyde. So the verdict, it was a trial by jury. So the verdict was not guilty on the largest charge, which was the conspiracy to commit murder charge. They were, however,
Right.
guilty on all of the other charges.
Now,
So I
what
can,
were those other charges? So
sure,
we
yeah.
can get
So
the record straight here.
absolutely. So the other charges, one of them was possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose, and I can kind of go into detail of what these mean because they're kind of nebulous terms. That would be the
Right.
first one. The second one was mischief over 5,000. Pretty low bar for that one. Throwing eggs at a high school would count as mischief over 5,000. Um,
Right.
so it could be just about anything. And then there was an additional charge for one of the defendants, Tony Oleanic, and that charge was possession of an explosives device. So if I can kind of break these down for you one by one,
Yeah, please
I,
do. Please
I'd like
do.
to start with that one because it's kind of the most absurd of all of them. So there's
Well,
this.
just for people that are listening to this, I'll put it in the description down below. There, you have the complete COUTTS story in a thread on Twitter. So that link will be down there. This is going to be like the TLDR of this video. So people get a gist of it. If you want more in-depth details, link is in the description down below. So check that out. So let's get to this. First off, people who aren't familiar with the case, there was a COUTTS border blockade during the Freedom Convoy. There was some contention with the police, and then a mysterious photograph that shows up with all these guns. Everybody bails, and 4 guys get arrested. And then it's 2.5 years in remand, not even in jail or prison. And these guys weren't let out on bail, and their trial went not swimmingly, and here they are, found guilty on certain things, and then they're sentenced. So let's get into that
Sure.
explosives one.
Sure. So first, I'll correct you a little bit there. So there was originally 13 arrests, Clyde, not 4.
Okay.
So yeah, so originally it was quite a large group of people that were arrested. Only 4 were charged with the conspiracy to commit murder charge, but the other 9 of those 13 were all charged with possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose, and they all eventually had those charges stayed. So
Okay, and by stayed, that means they just dropped it, or
basically, essentially, this is a
okay.
group of people. These 13, not one of them knows all of the others. Not one of them. So this is a
Okay, so
completely
they might know
disconnected.
each other, a few of each other, but they don't know. It's not a group. It's not a group by
Yes,
any
to the best
definition.
of my understanding, 4 of them were living together, and they worked together as well at an LED lighting factory in Calgary.
Okay.
They were pretty young too. They were in their early 20s. And one of the issues that this created, one of their bail conditions before the charges was stayed, is that there was a no contact order. They weren't allowed to speak with each other, but they worked at the same LED factory. So they had to build the schedule around their bail conditions.
Oh, that's
Just,
terrible.
yeah, the process was the punishment, I suppose you could say.
So
But anyway,
let's get
back to
into
the explosive
yeah,
charge.
the explosives charge.
Yeah, and I apologize, Clyde. This is a rabbit hole that breaks off into all kinds of other rabbit holes, but
I believe you.
we'll try to just stay focused and anchored to the explosives device for now. So Tony Oleanic's dad was a gravel quarry miner. So he would mine gravel quarry pits. I don't know much about mining, but essentially,
I happen to have you. I used to work in a gravel pit,
okay,
so
so you
I know
probably
quite a
know
bit about it.
more about
So
this than
yes,
I do.
there's explosives. You're drilling holes. You're blowing up rocks. There's
That's right.
Amex. There's det cord. There's all of the percussion caps. All of that stuff available at those sites.
That's right. So yeah, you probably know a lot more about this than I do. Essentially, they call it a firecracker, as I understand it. So it's kind of a very rudimentary little explosive device that you would use to break up gravel or to find drill bits if they were, you know, lost in the mine or whatever, something along those lines. It's used for
Okay.
gravel quarrying. I know
Okay.
nothing about this,
Yeah.
but the point
So
is
it's an industrial equipment. It's not
correct.
anything for any other purpose.
So his dad had this firecracker that he was using for gravel quarrying more than 10 years ago, and it was in a wooden box buried underneath the staircase from his leftover belongings from when he died. 200 kilometers away from the protest. So
200 kilometers away.
correct. There is no evidence whatsoever that Tony even knew it was there. It was just
And this
left.
is the one of the charges he was found guilty
Correct.
of?
So when I was in Lethbridge, we had 3 days while the jury was deliberating. And during those 3 days, we would get called back into the courthouse every now and then because the jury would have questions for the judge in order to help them render the most accurate verdict possible. And one question that they had for him was, well, if somebody doesn't know that they're in possession of something, are they legally in possession of it? And so that would suggest that they were very much on the fence, the jury, over whether or not to make him guilty on the explosives charge, which makes sense because, there's a very high likelihood that he had no idea it was there.
Right.
But possession is 9/10 of the law, as the saying goes, right? So.
Right. But you're talking anyway. I mean, he was found guilty on that. So, and that carried a portion of his sentence. I'm assuming. And then there
Yeah.
was there other charges?
Yeah, so then the other charges was the mischief over 5,000 charge. As I mentioned, they were both guilty of that. Chris Carbert actually pled guilty to that, so it didn't even have to go to a jury, which I thought was an interesting decision on the part of his defense lawyer. And then the last charge was the possession of a weapons for a dangerous purpose, which, if I can break that one down for you, it's one of those charges that sounds a lot worse than it actually is.
Right, because it sounds terrible.
It sounds like a terrible thing, but if you were to stand in your living room, with a kitchen knife and say, this would make a great weapon for defending myself in the event of a home invader, technically you would be guilty of possession of a weapon for a dangerous offense. So we don't have what they call in the United States, colloquially, they call it stand your ground law. We don't have preemptive self-defense laws in Canada. So basically what they did in order to be guilty of that charge was they said, well, we've got guns and we would use them to defend ourselves in the event that we needed to against a tyrannical government.
And that's it. That's the charge.
That's the charge.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's not that the guns were illegal. It's not that they were improperly handled. It's not that they were.
It's not that they were
stored.
used.
And yeah, it's not that they were even used. Of course not. I will say this: I don't recommend bringing guns to a protest.
Yes, that's pretty safe to say.
If there's one,
wasn't there some contention there? So wasn't there some contention though that they were kind of rock in a hard place where they had their firearms in their pickup trucks and they were leaving their pickup trucks behind, and so they thought that it would be irresponsible because it's part of the law. You can't just leave them behind. So they thought it would be more responsible to bring them, transport them to another area. And then did they have them at the protest or did they have them stored in some other location?
They had them stored at a different location, which wasn't too far from the protest. I went to all of these different places in order to figure out what the distances were. And I would say it's about 20 minutes from the Smuggler Saloon to where a 20-minute walk, maybe a 5-minute, even shorter drive.
Okay.
Yeah. And they were held in kind of bullet trailers, they call them. It's like an actual name. They're kind of these standalone fifth wheel trailers. And they were parked at lady Joanne Person was her name, and she was kind of the substitute teacher, the substitute history teacher for the area. She let them stay over for the evening, and so they kind of stored their guns there.
And so that wasn't seen as the responsible thing to do. They were assumed that they would have left them in their trucks unattended.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I guess you're right. I mean, it's a good way of putting it, between a rock and a hard place, right? I think in hindsight's 2020, the best decision would have been maybe take the guns and leave the bullets behind. I mean, then who knows? But it's also important to note that there's a gun culture in Southern Alberta that we don't have in the rest of the country, right? Especially when you get south of Lethbridge. You're closer to Montana and Texas than you are to anywhere in Canada. It's really common for people. There's a coyote bounty in COUTTS, so it's not uncommon for people to be walking around with hunting rifles and for shooting coyotes.
Yeah, it's you'd assume that's just normal, but yeah, obviously don't bring it with you at the protest. But 20 minutes away, you think. But anyway, so they were found guilty. He was found guilty on that charge as well. Oh, both of them were found guilty on that charge. And then so then that went to the sentencing. Obviously, there were the big scary one, the big scary bad charge of conspiracy to commit murder of a RCMP agent or officer. They were found innocent of. So
Correct.
everything moving forward from there. The reason for the scare in the media, the claims of why we needed civil liberties, suspended via the Emergencies Act across the entire country. The claim of these two men that was found, they were found not guilty of
Correct.
that. Correct.
Yeah.
So then now we're in sentencing, and we're expecting, if you're charged with, irresponsible handling of an explosive device, improper transportation of a firearm, and I don't know what's the other charge, being Dennis the Menace for a day. I mean, you
Yeah.
think, okay, well, you've already served 2.5 years in jail in
In
remand, which
remand.
which apparently, from my understanding, when you're accounting for time served, it accounts for double the time
Yeah,
served
one and a
because it's
half,
so
and then
extreme.
double for solitary. Generally,
Right, and they were in solitary for a good amount of time as
long
well,
time.
correct?
Yep.
So here we are, sentencing time, and they get what?
6.5 years.
Both of them. So
Yeah,
like
with
they didn't discriminate amongst the charges.
I think that Carbert received 6.5 years for his two charges, and Tony received six, and then received the extra half for the explosives charge, if my memory serves me correctly. But it does include time served. So, as we were saying backstage just a moment ago, they should probably be out within the next 2 years at some point, based off of the calculation of one and a half to time served in remand and double for time served in solitary confinement.
And we're talking about two men that have no previous criminal record.
Chris Carbert had a minor ecstasy possession charge from when he was a minor. It was a long, long time ago. And Tony, his record is squeaky clean. I don't even believe he has a speeding ticket.
Wow. Wow, incredible. I mean, just kind of, how do you even look at that? We okay, I'm judging this based on what we see across Canada right now. We have violent criminals coming out, no bail. When they do go to jail, it's for limited amounts of time. The sentencing is pretty lenient for a lot of people doing really, really bad things. Why the discrepancy in this case?
Politics.
Politics, just that. Just that.
Yeah. There's no other explanation, really. You're right. We have a revolving door justice system. I mean, Bill C-75, that was the bail not jail bill that the Liberals passed. Ironically, because when Stephen Harper was prime minister, the remand facilities were getting a little full. It was taking a long time to get people to trial, especially people who had not been afforded bail. So the Liberals came in and they had this bright idea to give bail to people sooner, which is a well-intentioned idea. And so there's some irony there. They passed that bill, and now we see rapists and murderers and all the most evil people you can think of walking out amongst us. But these guys received no bail for the better part of 2.5 to 3 years. And I can kind of explain a little bit more about that too, because that was something you
Yeah,
were
please
curious
do.
about the last time we spoke about this. So in Canada, the way the bail system works, so there's generally three reasons why you would be denied bail. The first reason, and the most obvious, is flight risk, right? So they don't want to give you bail if they think you're not going to show back up to court. So these guys weren't a flight risk. The second one is a danger to the public. That one's kind of self-explanatory as well, right? So if you're like a serial killer, they're not going to give you bail because there's a high likelihood that you're going to reoffend while you're awaiting trial. That wasn't the case here with these guys. The third reason, they called it
But that has
tertiary.
been the case in Canada, where we've had
Oh, certainly it has. Oh,
yes,
definitely. But that wasn't the case for these gentlemen. They
right.
were denied bail under what they call tertiary grounds. So that's the third reason. And the third reason is if it would bring disrepute to the legal system. So in other words, we've charged you with something so heinous that it would look ridiculous. We would have egg on our face if we gave you bail. because why would we charge you with something so ridiculous if you weren't guilty of it, in which case you would seem like a danger to the public. No, that's kind of confusing. But essentially what that means is if the government accuses you of being, they say, Clyde, you are a cop killer, or you want to be a cop killer. Well, even though you've never killed a cop, it would bring legal disrepute to the system if they gave you bail and put you back out on the streets based off of that accusation.
But
And so
doesn't
that's,
the innocent verdict give disrepute to the justice system in this case?
yeah. So the innocent verdict, it's just for contextually, for those who might not be following the story as closely as you and I are, they received the not guilty verdict. What was it, about a month ago?
Yes, it was some
Yeah.
time ago, and they had to
Yeah.
sit there waiting for sentencing
Yeah. Because
while
they
it kept
still had
getting
to wait.
rescheduled over and over again.
They had to wait to be sentenced on the other charges that they were guilty of.
Right.
Yeah.
But it doesn't does it not bring disrepute to the justice system
Of course.
that they were found innocent on the charges that were the tertiary grounds for which they said it would bring disrepute to the justice system if they were let out?
Of course, that's the grand irony of all of this, Clyde. Like, don't you think it brings disrepute to the legal system that I'm still in here? Of course. But this is the world that we live in. It's a bit of a clown show for sure.
Sorry, my phone just started ringing.
Awesome.
But yeah, no, so now these two men are going to be in jail until 2025 likely. And with good behavior, maybe early in 2025. And then once that's done, they're free. They're scot free. They've paid their debt to society. Is that how that
I
works?
believe there's another condition. They're never allowed to own firearms ever again. That's one of the conditions, and I think that's about it. They both, I believe, do have a lifetime firearm ban, and then they also have to succumb to a DNA test. Not really sure what the purpose of that is, but because it's not like they're, accused of sex crimes. Again, nobody was actually hurt here. There was no victim statement.
There
right?
was no.
I mean,
Well,
there's no
the
victim.
crime. The crime was just. Yeah, no victims. There's no victims in this.
It was as close as you could get, in my opinion, to a thought crime. So what they did, Clyde, is they said to some undercover officers, some female undercover officers, and these were both single men. It's important to remember that as well contextually, that they would defend the other protesters in the event that the police or the UN police or some other foreign policing service came in to violently suppress the protest. They jaw flapped to these women and they said, like, we'll protect you. And that was it. There was no bullets were fired. No guns were taken to the protest. No pipe bomb ever went near the protest. It was 200 kilometers away, buried under the floorboard. Nobody even knew it was there. So I just want to kind of put all of those things to rest. There were no guns at the protest. There was guns fairly close to the protest. That's fair enough. You could make that argument. There was no pipe bomb anywhere near the protest, and there was no violence occurred whatsoever.
Unbelievable. That's our justice system in Canada. Well, I guess it's a tiered system. I guess you could call it that.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it depends on your intent, I suppose, and that's a political thing. So I wanna share this out for everybody. The long form, go check it out. Alex Zoltan, the complete COUTTS story. You're also you're in the process of writing a book as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing that. Do you have any idea when that might be published?
I'd say I could probably get it done in a couple of months, but it's a living story. So, it depends on what happens between now and publication date.
Amazing. So, well, as always, links in the description down below. Thanks again for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Clyde.